Hi, I'm Laura,
I'm Deanne.
And I'm Philippe.
and welcome to our Lymond book club. We are reading Queensplay by Dorothy Dunnett, and we are on part 3, chapters 1 and 2. So I'm going to lead us through a discussion of these chapters, but before we do that, Dee and Philippe are going to share their initial reactions.
Sure. So we learn quite a lot, especially in the first chapter, and it seems that some of our theories we've had going through are pretty true. So Robin Stewart is indeed sort of the assassin, but he's definitely somebody else's lackey. And we still don't have confirmation of that, but I think Dee and I have sussed it out. So I liked that sort of parlor room scene with Lymond and his brother, which, by the way, I love that Richard is in it now. Yeah, so we got that, and then we get another horrible animal torture chapter. So I didn't appreciate that, but
And people torture chapter,
and people torture.
Everybody it's terrible.
I cared more about the horses than most of the people in that pile up. So, to be honest, I feel a little bad for Genstan because he hasn't really had much of a role, but
Yeah.
Oh well.
God.
Well, I felt bad for Lymond.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah, but he's not dead, so.
No, of course not.
He's got somersaulted off the edge of the thing or something.
He's got 4.5 more books that we've got to read about. Yeah. So there's a great sort of moment as well. The conversation in the organ room between Lymond and Oonagh, which we'll dive into, where I was actually a little surprised by that. I didn't think Oonagh actually knew as much of what was going on as she did. So that was a surprise to me.
I'm still torn on her. Okay, overall reactions. I really enjoyed these 2 chapters in the sense that a lot happens and I liked finding out things, and I felt like there was a lot of stuff to chew on in these 2 chapters. The end of the second chapter was, of course, horrible, and reading that was terrible. But I mean, at the end of the chapter where it says something about it seemed probably that he died there in that explicable parlor. All I wrote was definitely not. So, I mean, I'm not worried about Lymond at all.
I think Thady Boy is dead. I don't think we'll see any more of Thady Boy.
Yeah, maybe. That's
Lymond.
A possibility. That's definitely a possibility. In fact, that would be likely, I would think. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one thing that Philippe and I wanted to mention before we go into these 2 chapters is that we, as usual, we always do, Laura turns off the video and then we keep talking. So last time we were talking, we kind of finished our discussion and she turned off the video, and then Philippe and I kept going. And one of the things that we were talking about, because they definitely, I mean, obviously I'm completely convinced, yes, Robin has poisoned Lymond. I'm giving up on Robin being innocent. But we were talking about the idea that he's perhaps going to play the role of a tragic character in this instead of a villain. So maybe, because I just don't want to give up on the fact that he's not horrible. I don't want him to be a horrible character. I want him to
Nor do I.
Yeah, I just want him to be someone who has some redeeming qualities, and that those redeeming qualities come back or get developed or something, that in some way this character, that there's more to him than what we see right now. So one thing that Philippe and I talked about is that maybe he'll come back in some sort of self-sacrificial death scene. There'll be some kind of, he's learned something, or he sees something in Lymond or whatever, or something he knows, maybe he knows a fact or something, and he'll come charging in at some point and die in the attempt, that he'll somehow be redeemed in that way. So that was our guess.
Talked during our discussion. Yeah. We had talked in our discussion of the last book about how Dorothy Dunnett really embraces them and embraces them hard. So that sort of sacrificial redemption is a pretty big trope. Like, character that's done something bad redeems himself only to die almost immediately after.
Right.
So I could totally see that happening.
Right. Yeah. Like, there's definitely a sense in some of that, in that trope of the idea that, like, the character has done something that's so bad that they can't live, but they somehow redeem themselves at the end. I think a really recent example of this character, of this type of character, would be like Kylo Ren from Star Wars, where like he was oh, come on.
No, I'm sure.
Don't spoil me. I haven't seen it.
If you haven't seen it yet, you like, it's way past time we have to worry about spoilers for that movie. You haven't seen it?
No.
It's past time. Anyway, he fits that trope. I won't say anymore, but you got to be able to use pop characters.
I know. I've had like a year or something to watch it.
Yeah, at least. When did that movie come out?
No, thank you for sharing your Robin Stewart theory.
He could be vanished and gone forever, and we'll never see him again. Who knows?
He'll definitely be back in this book. That would be
Really?
silly if he wasn't, but
Yeah. I don't know.
who knows?
All right.
I would like to say something I would like to see that I don't think we've seen yet is a competent villain. Like, I feel like okay, this is just my feeling, but I feel like Lymond has been, like, his competency has been diminished by drink and debauchery and whatever. And so we're not seeing Lymond at his 100% effectiveness. And so our villain is also whoever they are. I still think it's Yummy, but he's not that great. Like, he's doing these over-the-top crazy plans that don't work, and like, he's not ensuring any kind of success by doing any sort of like plan B kind of situation or anything. Not doing any of that. So I feel like our villain is kind of incompetent as well. And so it would be interesting to see if at some point in this novel, like, if Lymond starts to crawl out of the Thady Boy thing and he starts to get maybe, because now Richard is here and we've had this, like, we know that Thady Boy is presumed dead. So like, maybe Lymond's going to climb out of that hole of wine and debauchery and all that. And if he does, then maybe we'll have a villain appear who's either our villain will get more competent, or there'll be a secondary villain who's more competent. I don't know. I just feel like we need a better foil for Lymond. We need a better adversary.
Do you think that Game of Kings had a particularly standout villain?
No.
I don't know who I would call the main villain, if there was a main villain with that. I mean, Andy Hunter was doing villainous things, but he was sort of a side plot.
Yeah, he wasn't really.
Like, anybody, I'd say Margaret Lennox, but
yeah,
again,
she wasn't huge. But I would like to see that. Like, I'd like to see, maybe it won't happen in this book.
right.
In fact, probably not. We would have been introduced to them by now. But I'd like to see, like, somebody who's sort of on Lymond's level, but evil.
Yeah.
You know, and so that his victory over a particular person as opposed to his victory over a situation. Because I feel like Game of Kings was more like his victory over series of situations. I'd like to see victory over a person. So
I also feel like one of the reasons there really wasn't a strong villain in the first book is because for a lot of the book, you're trying to figure out if Lymond is a villain or not. So,
yeah.
So you don't really want to muddle it with having this really sort of evil detractor.
Or maybe not muddle it. That might have, boy, we've gone way off topic. Like,
as we do.
I think having a clear villain in Game of Kings would have made Lymond the clear hero.
True.
And that would have been a mistake, because part of the fun and enjoyment of that book is that very thing you said, is figuring out like, who is this character? Is he, what are his motivations? Do we trust him? Do we not trust him? And if there'd been a very clear evil adversary, it would have just set up the contrast too well, I think. Yeah. So anyway.
There is so much I want to say right now that I can't.
We'll probably get a good villain at some point, so.
As long as it's about stuff to come and not stuff that we've completely missed, that we've already read, then I'm fine with it.
No, you haven't missed anything. I think, I think Margaret Lennox is the most horrific person in Game of Kings because of the way she is with Christian's death, that she basically causes it. But you're right that we don't really get that. That's not even clear that she's a villain until the end, and she doesn't actually do that much to thwart Lymond, because, like you're saying, that would have distracted from the whole mystery of, is he the villain? And the real interest is like his relationship with Richard and their battle, where there's not a clear hero and villain. It's actually just like the relationship itself that's so interesting, and their own dark sides that's so interesting.
Which is a complexity I like. And so maybe this desire on my part for like a clear villain, like maybe I actually don't want that. Like maybe that's me wanting a simpler story instead of the complex story that Dunnett's telling. And so maybe I shouldn't want that. Like maybe, you know, which is fine.
Luckily there's 4.5 more books coming, so you can have both on the horizon.
Who knows?
That's true.
It would just be so fun to see Lymond like have, I don't know. I guess I just want like an unambiguous, like.
I want him to have his Moriarty, you know? It's like a villain that's on the same level as he is.
Yeah, that's a good example.
Someone that pushes him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially because I think the first 2 books have very much explored his own dark side and his own flaws and his like having to overcome things internally, so maybe a nice change of pace would be something a little more tropey and dramatic. But anyway, my reaction to these 2 chapters is primarily I just love the scene with Richard so much, and I love that Richard comes through and he believes in his brother and he takes care of his brother, and like he gets annoyed at him for very good reasons, but he also wants to protect him. And it's like, this is like the first time we see them, you know, since the end of Game of Kings, where they're actually like acting like brothers who love each other, and it's so adorable. I love it so much.
I love how he's just like so competent, and then like, you know, like they're just like, you know, he's just so dependable, and it's like his defining characteristic is that he's dependable, and I love that. Like, oh.
And even though it was only like 2 paragraphs, I love that we got some Sibylla, just a little bit of Sibylla. Enough to know that she cares, and she cares so much that she's like, I feel like if I showed up, I'd be fine, but Lymond may not be able to hold it together. So,
and I love that we just get like, she knows him so well. And
all right, so let's jump in. I bet we'll talk more about that when we get there. All right, so we start out with part 1, or chapter 1, Blah, the Mill in Motion. I can't pronounce anything in French, I'm sorry.
I apologize for that every week.
People are now commenting with like corrections to our pronunciation. Like,
oh really?
No clue.
Before we get into anything in these first chapters, I like that the main portion of this book is called London, and these 2 chapters definitely are not about London. So it tells us where we're going to. So.
Are we going to go to London? Like.
I knew Philippe would notice this.
Yeah.
Of course. I read chapter titles, so.
I was confused too. I thought we were just going to head to London.
Well, no, it tells you. So it says part 3, London, the excitement of being hunted, but then it has the location of each chapter. So you've got blah, Amboise, blah, and then London.
And of course, I love the opening text. The excitement of being hunted takes half off it, just as the excitement of being ridden takes half off the horse, when it is a sensible adult that excites both.
A sensible adult.
Sensible. So you better be sensible, but.
I'm excited to actually eventually go somewhere I've been.
I love the London chapters purely because of that. I know where that is. I've been there. I know how to pronounce that.
Yeah. I'm like, I've been there. I know what that looks like. You know, yeah.
Yes.
I'm excited about that.
Okay, so chapter 1, The Mill in Motion. As to the mill, however, inasmuch as it could not do anything illegal if it were not set in motion, it is right that the person who set it in motion should be responsible for it. I take this as Lymond, having set all the circumstances in motion, is responsible for what happens, and in particular that he is responsible for what's happening to himself, having set it all in motion, but it may mean something else to you.
I mean, yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, but also everybody else, like whoever our shadowy villain is responsible for all of the, like, is responsible for Robin Stewart in some way, you know, and so it's sort of, I think it's sort of broad, just like, yeah, Lime is responsible for the stuff he set in motion. Whoever is responsible, yeah, I mean, is responsible for what he set in motion. Although I sort of wonder, okay, here's another thing I wonder. If our villain is Dabney, which I think it is, I mean, is he necessarily like the top villain? Because he's related to the Linux crowd, and he seems, whoever the villain is, seems to be kind of dumb in some ways. And if it's Dabney, like, Margaret Lennox is not dumb, and you know, I would imagine she could, I don't remember if we know if her husband is all that savvy, although if she's controlling him, he might not need to be. Anyway, I wonder if there's if Dabney is our villain, is he also being manipulated and or suggested and or controlled by the English crowd, English / whoever they are. I don't remember where their loyalties are right now. I guess the English.
I have a clear memory from the first book that is it Matthew Stewart?
Matthew. Matthew.
He's got a reputation amongst his fellow generals of being a terrible strategist.
Yeah, so
she's the brains in that family.
Yeah, so if Margaret is manipulating, like, if we have this image of like this, and maybe this is giving her too much credit. It's totally possible that I'm giving her too much credit. But if we have this like puppet master behind the scenes, sort of, you know, manipulating the men around her, then if Dabney is the villain, he could be one of those men. So that might be kind of a stretch. I don't think we've seen any of that in the text, or at least not explicitly, but.
Well, we are going to spend the rest of this chapter in London, so.
We are going to London at some point,
so could Margaret show up? Probably. We'll see.
Maybe.
I hope she does. I do.
Why do you hope she shows up?
So Lymond can do terrible things to her.
We don't like her.
All right, so we start out in Margaret Erskine's point of view, where we learn that Robin Stewart will be away for a month. He's gone to Ireland. Jenny is coolly attempting to build a court and expecting deference. And Richard arrives.
Richard!
Yay!
Yay!
So then Daubeny has been away, and he comes back also, and he hears a mildly surprising bit of news, which inspires him to go visit Thady Boy Bella, and he asks about Liam Rowe, who's left. What is the surprising news? We're led to think it's Liam Rowe leaving, but it could also be that Thady Boy is alive, if he actually knows.
Mm-hmm. And then he has this little scene on 238, like the bottom half of 238, with Thady Boy, where he completely throws Robin Stewart under the bus. Yeah. I mean, if he is the person who directed Robin, like, he just totally throws him under the bus. And if he's not the person who directed Robin, then he's just like rambling a little bit idiotically, but you know.
Yeah.
So.
No, for sure. I think another motivation could be that he's digging, like he's trying to figure out what Lymond knows about, or what Thady Boy knows about Robin. If he did tell Robin to poison him, is he trying to figure out, like, does he know that Robin poisoned him? Like, does he just think he got really drunk?
the end of that little rant was, so I hoped nothing had been said, with a little ellipsis as if, tell me what he said.
Yeah. He's so dumb. Like, Lyman's going to fall for that and be like, oh, yeah, actually, I think he poisoned me.
He said he was poisoning me and that there was someone else involved.
We also have, by the way, the George Douglas is there looking over Lymond, noticing the suffused eyes and the softer weight and the decisive air of abandon. So you guys were right. Lymond got fat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's a big part where even Richard notices it coming up that we'll jump into, but I was not surprised at that. I was like, oh, he doesn't need the padding anymore, does he?
He's just so unhealthy, poor guy.
Well, yeah, and there's definitely, like, throughout this whole Thady Boy thing, this slow realization that, oh, he's not acting, he's really messed up. And it sort of sneaks up on you, because at first he is acting and you trust him, he's so confident, but then he, like, starts to lose himself. We also have this bit, he invites Thady Boy to his house, the Verrerie, and it says, objects d'art were Lord d'Aubigny's business. So I like this.
Oh, yuck. Right next to that, because, yeah.
Like he's an object.
Yeah, it's just this objectification of Thady Boy that you've mentioned several times. Like, it's just so explicit that their use of him as an object is...
Yeah. And then right after that, there's this moment, the silken arm of Dongan suddenly encircled his shoulders, and then George Douglas gives a smile that was quite masterly and almost won a response from Francis Crawford. So I think this is Douglas noticing Dongan, like, being all over him and the way they objectify him and treat him as this, like, sexual object of entertainment. And George Douglas is smirking at him, and it annoys Lymond so much that he almost responds. And it makes you wonder, like, what is Lymond really feeling about this? What does he think of Dongan? He probably can't stand him and thinks this whole thing is gross, and he's really, like, creeped out by it and trying not to be and trying to pretend that it's all cool and it's part of his undercover guise, but, like, is actually gross, and he knows it's gross and is upset by it. And that comes out when George Douglas makes a smirk and he almost responds.
Yeah.
I definitely noticed in this section and for the following next two sections that Dorothy Dunnett is now mixing Thady Boy and Lymond and Francis Crawford a lot more than she used to. I mean, I think it's coming off of the section in the last chapter where she said the two had finally sort of become one. So now we're getting these different names all thrown together. And it continues to the end of the point that we just read. So it's like he's really blending the two at this moment.
100%. Yeah. I love that you picked up on that. All right, so then we discover that someone has set up Thady Boy to fight the Cornishman, which he doesn't know about. He's surprised. And he then accepts it with annoyance, acceptance, and a wild and untrustworthy enthusiasm, and decides that, sure, he'll go fight this Cornishman, which is pretty dumb, but also, I don't know, I think he's just lost himself.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, it's possible that he sees, like, oh, this is a moment where he could get some information, but he's not thinking clearly about what that's going to mean, or, you know.
Yeah, and it's a wild and trustworthy enthusiasm. He knows it's an opportunity to get information. Also, he's angry at this guy for killing two of Tasha's men and trying to kill Liam Rowe. But I think also he's just like, I mean, we find later he doesn't care about his life at all. He's so just, like, lost in this performance to, you know, his own detriment.
Do we ever get more information about who the Cornishman is, or no?
Well, not in these chapters.
No. Just like a hired
goon.
Hired goon, yeah.
And this is a silly question, but this is what I think. Cornishman means from Cornwall?
That's what I assume.
Which is in England? Okay.
Yes.
That's what I thought. I didn't know if it was England or Ireland or Scotland. So
you never know.
Our United Kingdom friends, please don't be mad at me for that.
I think it's England. Because isn't Cornwall... No,
it's
I'm
in England.
Because I'll be wrong.
Okay.
Okay, so then
research, but I don't want to because I'm afraid of.
I know, I'm afraid I'll find out things. I feel like there are coal mines in Cornwall, but who knows? It could be like Beatrice Potter land, and I'm completely wrong. So who knows?
I'm not going to Google.
Pasties are, and they're delicious. So they were definitely in England somewhere.
I'm not going to Google it and tell you because it doesn't matter.
All right. Sorry.
It's okay.
Little non sequitur there.
So Lymond does try and fail to find the Cornishman ahead of the fight, and then he forces himself to rest for an hour, which is kind of interesting that he knows how sick he is, that he actually forces himself to rest.
I mean, at least he's got that much awareness. I feel like that's giving us a clue that I feel like if we hadn't had that little piece of information, I would not find the fight believable at all. Because I feel like that little piece of information gives us a sense that at least he's somewhat aware that this is going to be a trial and that he's making some attempt to go into it ready.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
He won't
Does
be.
he know beforehand that it's an assassination attempt?
I think so.
Well, I think he does because he knows that this guy tried to kill Illiamro already.
Oh, that's what I figured as
and
well.
he knows that he wasn't part of setting up the challenge. Like somebody else did. So yeah.
Right. And I think it's the rumor that's gone about is that he was the one that challenged the Cornishman. And he's like, no, I didn't do that, but got to play into it. So
yeah. So then we have Richard kind of arriving and catching. And Richard's reaction is interesting. He hears it with complete calm. At one or two points, his mouth twitched. So and then later it says his eyes were amused. So he hears what his brother's been up to, and at this point, he has full confidence in his brother, and he's amused by his brother's antics, I just love that he has a high opinion of Lymond and trusts and respects what he's been up to, although he's kind of not prepared to realize how like over the edge Lymond is, but at the same time, Lymond has done good work. He has protected the queen. He did figure out who one of the assassins is. So, it's not completely incompetent, and Richard respects that.
I love the line where he says, this steadiness, this quality of tough-minded tranquility, which I love that, tough-minded tranquility. That's a great phrase. Tough-minded tranquility, which could sometimes seem stolid, was balm to the disease of danger and unrest, which was preying on them all. In this was Coulter's great strength. I love that description of him.
I feel like she's leaving some things out, like, except for that one time where he lost his freaking mind.
I know! I thought, but wasn't he like a basket case just a month ago? But maybe he's become very grounded and settled since.
I think he's become more grounded, because it also has this bit on 241 where it says that Sibylla's soul belonged to her younger son and Richard did not grudge it, which we know from the previous book he was upset by, but it seems like now that he's got his wife and he's got a kid, he's happy. He doesn't begrudge his brother being loved by mom because Richard's got a whole family and Lymond doesn't.
And she literally mentions like the joy he now possesses with Marietta, and like that's lovely.
Yeah.
I love that we get a tiny update on them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So basically we get this whole update on like who he is for first time readers who might have picked this book up in the wrong order, and that he and Marietta are happy, and that he had set himself since boyhood to outweigh all the wanton recklessness of the younger brother, which is kind of an interesting way to describe him.
Yeah.
This gives me a clue
that she said. Wait, what?
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I just continue that. Like, it's also interesting that she said, like, there's nothing more he desires, which is probably part of the groundedness,
Yeah, for sure.
I was going to say this gives me a clue as to Lymond's age, or at least a range, because it says Richard is in his mid-30s. Just the way he talks to him later, where he says he's in his youth, like I see at least like a 10 or 12 year difference between them.
Yeah.
So like I see Lymond as being in his mid-20s or younger, which is younger than I had assumed. But like I'm starting to refine that age range for him, and it's younger than I thought.
Yeah. I think he's younger than 25. Which,
I can see that. Yeah, definitely.
younger than I thought. Yeah.
Does that change your interpretation of anything that's happened so far?
Just makes me wonder how he had the time to learn all of these skills that he has while also being a slave on a galley for 2 years. So
Yeah, like he's a super prodigy.
Mhm.
A lot of things, like, really? But I mean, like, how many instruments does he play? You know,
Well, they didn't have video games or TV back then.
that's true. But he'd have to have like a tutor for every instrument. I mean,
Sure, Sibylla had a tutor, you know.
that's true.
I mean, it
Yeah.
also makes you wonder then how old was he when he was supposedly spying for Scotland or for England?
Good
Betraying Scotland.
question.
Like, was he like 16 when he got?
Could be.
Yeah.
When Margaret Lennox got him.
Yeah. I mean, people did everything younger back then, so it makes sense, but still young. Anyway,
So we also learned that Richard and Sibylla were both glad that Lymond left. We don't know why Sibylla was glad, actually, but we know that we can assume, I think, that Richard is glad because he doesn't want to leave because he wants to stay with Marietta because they're going to have a baby.
They had the baby.
Yeah, but I think at the time when Lymond left, they hadn't had the baby.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it says Lymond left wholly on pleasure bent. Yes, no? I think yes, that's probably true. And he knows that the Queen Dowager did not voluntarily summon him, so it must be something Francis related. And Sibylla was invited but declined. And we can laugh at what she says. Do they expect me to appear unworldly and strongly maternal like a Scotch clocking hen? It will be a pleasure to refuse.
I like her.
Oh, yeah. And then also, as you guys pointed out, I just love that bit that she, who knew him through and through, she knew that they might have learned something from Lymond's face.
Yeah.
So his vulnerability is his mother.
Mm-hmm. But Richard is astute too in this moment, because he says either the Queen is in trouble or Francis or both. The sooner I go and find out what that fool son of yours is doing, the sooner we shall both be back. It's like he knows he's not being asked to come to France just on like a royal visit. You know, there's got to be some reason he's being called in.
Yeah, I also love that when he suspects Lymond's doing something crazy, he's the fool son of his mother, not my brother. You know, it's like the parents who are like, you know, your son did this, and then the other parent's like, no, it's your son who did that. You know. I also love that she equates Lymond and Richard on the next page in 242 when they see each other for the first time, and it says, in neither face was there a trace of recognition. They were a capable pair. And so you just get the sense that like Richard is also capable, like just as capable as Lymond in that whole spycraft and like keeping people from knowing what you're really thinking, and everything he feels is not showing on his face. And I like that.
Which is interesting that he's able to do that here, because Lymond's whole motivation in the first book was because Richard couldn't keep a straight face. And I think that Lymond was right. I think Richard probably can't keep his face straight when there's a lot of emotion involved, but in this circumstance there isn't really, so he's actually able to act better.
Able to do it.
So then we have this moment of Thady Boy in the midst of one of those wild parties being swept into the wide, low-ceilinged room. And there's like a bunch of images like this throughout these chapters of Thady Boy in the midst of a group being swept along. And we just have this feeling that like he's not leading at all anymore. He is just being dragged along with all this stuff and like wants to get out or needs to get out and can't. So the whole thing is swapped where he was the Pied Piper leading them. Okay, one of the best lines in the series. Lymond's behavior, as always, went to the limits of polite usage and then hurtled off into space. It's one of those things you reblog on Tumblr to try to get people to read these books.
Yes.
So then notably, there, you know, another one of those crazy events, and his voice was blurring as it always did by this time. So we have this idea like this is every night now. He's just wrecked. No one had trouble to ask him to play music. So it's not for the music, it's not for the art at all anymore. It's just for the debauchery, and he's probably too out of it to play the music well anymore either.
It's sad. He won his way into the public grace of the court by showing his skill and his talent, and he's sort of become their fool now. Like he's taken the place of Brusket, which is, you don't see him being mentioned
literally. He did at the beginning, like in that very first night
with the juggling. Yeah,
he took the place of the fool, and that has worked its way through.
Which I see on page 240. Richard even wonders if that's the sort of role he's taken. He asks, a fan and his clothes hung with bells? No, obviously one of his grosser deceptions. So like Richard almost expects that that would be the way he sort of ingratiated himself. No, right word. I meant ingrained himself. Sorry.
They both work. Yeah. I also always just think of the super talented musician who like becomes famous and then lives a really debauched lifestyle and ends up, broken and tabloid fodder and laughed at by the world, and their music, of course, suffers at that point and isn't worth it anymore.
Yeah, and then they die at 27, unfortunately.
Yep. So then we have the Cornishman.
A couple years to go. We think.
So, you think?
What?
I said if he's
part of the okay.
Yeah, a couple years to 27. So then there's this whole fight scene with the Cornishman where I think we're led to believe that he's killing this guy for fun, but that's not actually what's happening. And one of the tricks is Margaret Erskine seeing the eagerness on his face, which his mind was never, as a rule, so simple to read. Yeah, because he's not really eager for this.
Yeah, I didn't think he was doing it for fun, but I was surprised that he killed him at the end.
Yes.
I was very surprised by that. And the whole, I'm not sure how much we need to talk about the actual fight, but except for the dumping sugar on him, which I thought was delightful. Like that was a great move. 3 boxes of marzipan.
Powdered sugary marzipan, like a whole bunch of it or something.
Yeah. When he first did it, I was like, what? And then I'm like, oh, now he's sticky.
Yeah, no, it's super clever, and it's a very Lymond thing to do. He always thinks of those, sort of takes those leaps of imagination that take him ahead of everybody else. I think the other notable thing about the fight is that he's struggling so much to keep up, and this is a fight he would have easily won in the last book. Yeah,
and he's able to, but so then this whole section at the bottom of 247 where I just don't feel like I know what happened. Like obviously it ends up with the Cornishman dead, but the last 2 paragraphs of 247 where it's the final moments of the fight, and he's talking with the Cornishman, and the Cornishman is saying something and he's listening, and then he's saying something else, and then he's listening, but I'm just like, what happened? And then he kills him.
Doesn't it give us the answer in the next bit, though? It says he was asked...
No, I mean, when I was reading it, I was like, what happened here?
What's the answer in the next bit, Philippe?
The Cornishman doesn't give him anything. He doesn't give him any information at all.
So what I took from that was that Lymond needs the villain to think that the Cornishman told him something important. And if the Cornishman had given up his information, Lymond would have let him live. But because then he could have told the villain that he told him or whatever. But because he had nothing to say and he couldn't say anything, Lymond killed him so that the villain thinks that he has information. Is that right? Yeah.
I think so, because Lymond is trying to flesh out the villain. So he's trying to be like, hi, I'm a target. Come get me.
Yeah. I know stuff about you. You should kill me now.
Plans are terrible.
I don't feel like the smartest thing to do.
Well, we get this further in the chapter. We remember that he tried to kill himself in the previous book. He's veering into this borderline suicidal behavior again.
And while he's the target for whoever the killer is, nobody's trying to kill Mary at the moment. So,
or Richard, for that matter. Not
Exactly. Keep everyone else safe, make myself the target. If I die, it doesn't matter because my life has no meaning.
Oh no, Lymond.
what he gets explicit about. It's really
Yes.
sad.
Okay, just a couple more notes on the fight. We get another confirmation that he'd stopped wearing the stuffed and elaborate clothing, or he's wearing stuffed and elaborate clothing, which lets him get rid of the fake belly, and his way of life had taken the illusion near enough to reality. So physically a mess, and then we also have him livid and breathing in fast, retching gas as he's fighting. So again, he's just like, it's not just the drinking, it's also the deadly nightshade, but not the Lymond we knew from the previous book.
And he's super out of shape. Like it's not just the drinking and the debauchery. It's the fact that he probably hasn't had regular exercise in months. So speaking of someone who hasn't had any exercise in months.
I would not be able to fight a Cornishman right now.
No.
Has Lymond not only been dyeing his hair, but dyeing his skin as well?
He has, because it keeps referring to his like artificially darkened skin.
Yeah.
Okay. He's been staining his skin in some
I didn't catch on that until this chapter, because it says beneath the dyed skin pretty obviously. But I was like, oh, maybe that's why everybody says that, you know, Thady Boy is this like dark figure. So I don't know.
I think he also like to dye your eyebrows and your like stubble. Maybe you have to like rub it in your skin. I don't know.
Yeah, I thought maybe it was just that the dye was from his hair because he's using soot, I think, and ash to dye it. Maybe it was just coloring his skin too, but who knows?
And maybe it's part of the disguise. No one would think he's this pale blonde Scotsman is this dark Irishman. So I also then in the fight with this amazing, horrible image of the dead Cornishman rhymed and sparkling with sugar. The wrestler lay like some child's flaccid sweetmeat in death, and the dogs licked his eyelids. Which is horrible, but I think also part of this whole imagery of the French court covered in glistening sugar and rotten underneath. And the fact that the people find it delicious. This is so entertaining. What a great fight. This guy ended up dead and the dogs were licking the sugar off of his eyelids.
You know, one thing I found sort of interesting is that we have all of this reference to the court being rotten and that like this sugary exterior and rotten interior and all that. But a lot of what's explicitly said about the king, she doesn't really say anything explicitly negative about the king. Like we sort of get things like he has a wife and a mistress, but he seems to treat them like they both have power. He sort of pulled Diabni and the constable like out of prison that they were in. He spends too much money. Like she's referenced that, like the court's poor because he's wasted money. But we don't like see him, and he's having an affair with Jenny, but we don't see the king actually being debauched very much. You know, he's not involved in these revelries other than sort of watching us, but like he wasn't running across the rooftops, he wasn't doing like, so like the young men and the courtiers are doing all this stuff. So it's interesting, like by implication the king is definitely he's implicated in all of it because he's the leader, so he's allowing it to happen. But it's interesting that we're not seeing like, at least it doesn't seem like the king is rotten in the way that the court is rotten, which I mean it's sort of intriguing because he would be. I mean, you know,
I don't know enough of the
but
yeah, I don't know enough of the history, but I assume she bases their characterization on, you know, what's known from the historical sources of what they were all like.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting that like he doesn't seem to have personal involvement in all of this, and yet at the same time it's his court that's doing all this. So I don't know. Yep. It makes me intrigued about Henri too.
One of the fun things to do after you read this is to go to France and look at portraits and stuff, and like, oh, I know these people.
I'm gonna do so much research.
I'd love to go to France right now. I would love to go anywhere right now.
The world is back. We're all going to France, you guys.
Yay!
Okay, so then Thady Boy walks right up to Richard and invites him to his room flirtatiously. And Richard's kind of like, what are you doing? And he's like, the people who matter know who I am already anyway. And he also makes this little comment about Dongan. Richard says, Dongan is watching you. And Lymond just says, he's jealous. All right. And then we have this image of him drifting away, and Madame Marguerite had claimed him, and then Dongan brought him more drinks. Again, Dongan they're all using him. They're all feeding him alcohol when he's clearly ill and alcoholic. And he goes, God only knows who he goes home with, basically. Right. So at this point, he's sort of dragged them in this rotten direction, and now they're enabling him, and not good. So then the scene with Richard. Yay. And the opening line here of how Lymond greets Richard, quite so, I, king of flesh, flourishing in my flowers. Come in, I am sober, sensible, and have no designs on your virtue. Which is funny, but also really sad.
Yeah.
Richard. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
He said he's actually sober for once.
I know, right? Well, and I think this scene is super interesting. I'll just quickly summarize it. I'd love to dive into what's going on. Richard feels the extra flesh and is sorry, and he sees the dry hair, the unresilient skin, the shortened focus of far-seeing eyes, reduced and reddened. So he's starting to see, and then there's a bit later where he realizes this isn't all acting. This isn't something I could just brush off as, part of the performance. He's just really a mess, but he doesn't realize at this point how much of a mess. Mm-hmm. And then there's a nice sort of line that tells you a lot about the brothers and their different interests. And he realizes that Lymond is in reality much less interested in the new building at Mid-Coulter than he was in the political news. Richard's a homebody. He's interested in Mid-Coulter, what's going on with the family and the buildings and the sheep and whatever. But Lymond is super into the politics. And then they catch up, they talk about Scottish affairs, and it's actually a great conversation. They're exchanging news. Lymond is he's very astute. He has all these great observations. He has this great, sort of keeps this whole commentary going about all the political situation. He's figured out that George Douglas is the one who sent for Richard, or had him sent for. He gives this whole take on the French court that is exceedingly funny and tearingly precise. It rang true alarmingly, as if the wax tablets of the recording angel were being leafed through on a lectern. So Lymond has been out of it, yes, but he is also extremely observant, and he knows exactly what's going on, and he has done his job as a spy very well. But also there's kind of a couple times throughout, he kind of, I'll be right back, and then comes back, and Richard doesn't notice, and then the last time he is waiting, and it takes a long time, and then he realizes that Lymond has been pretending to pack, hasn't really been packing, so then he goes to get him, and he's throwing up in the corner room, and he's super, super, super sick.
He's throwing up blood.
Yeah.
Not good.
Deadly nightshade is bad for you.
Is it still an after effect of that?
I think it is, because we have also. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, does he have cirrhosis of the liver at this point?
I think that because there's a couple points later where it basically refers to the alcohol as self-medication, he's in a huge amount of pain and he's trying to drown the pain. So I still think it's the after effects of the deadly nightshade, messing up his whole digestive system.
I love that even in the midst of worry, Richard's still teasing him, where he's like, I suppose it's just something you ate, or are you bloody well pregnant as well? He's just he's super worried, but he's also dude.
It's super sweet. And also Richard goes in and supports him until it's over, and then lifts him up and carries him and puts him on the bed. So his big brother's taking care of him. It's so sweet. I just love it. And then I love also Lymond. Richard rescues on the hour, because Richard is the one that rescued him in the last book also. And then he asks Richard for some alcohol, and Richard's like, no. And his driving need is visible, which could be two things. It could be that he's in a huge amount of pain and he needs it as a painkiller, but it could also be that he is completely alcoholic and addicted to it and he needs it as an alcoholic, or both. And then Richard, in contrast to Dongen, brings him water, not liquor, which is what he actually needs. And we find out that he's pretty much not eating, he's just drinking. Again, probably because his digestive system is super messed up and he's going to throw up anything he eats.
Yeah, I'm assuming that's the nightshade still. Like, he's not eating any solid food. Which,
yeah.
Yikes.
Not good. So then they catch up about all the plot, which I love that if we have to have a plotty discussion, because I don't really care about the plot, that we have it in this emotional scene, so it's more entertaining for me. So one thing I actually quite like is Richard basically is like, if we can't get evidence about Robin Stewart, we could just have him killed. And Lyman's like, no. And he's actually quite empathetic. He feels bad for him. He was born into gall like a fly in an oak tree. He tried quite hard to get free. So he has some degree of care and empathy for Robin Stewart being in this situation.
But he's still using him. Like, we find out that he's known for some time that Robin Stewart has been the would-be assassin and has been doing these things to sort of get the truth out of him as to who his master is. So, like, I don't know how far back we can go and see that Lymond has known it's been Robin Stewart, but, like, he's been leading him on this whole time, which just makes me feel even worse for poor Robin Stewart. So, I mean, he tried to kill somebody. That's not great, but...
He's trying to kill a little girl.
Yeah.
I mean, it just makes me wonder if Lymond hadn't been lost in drink and debauchery and this whole plan, which was, partly a plan and partly an escape, I think. If he hadn't been lost in this, like, would he have handled Robin Stewart? Like, how much? I mean, I don't think it's a question. He would have handled Robin Stewart better. The question is, like, how much better could he have handled that situation?
Yeah, I think also Lymond is pretty ruthless. And he would put Robin's, happiness and emotions below the urgency of saving the queen.
Sure.
So maybe even if he'd been completely himself, he would have used him the same way. That said, he'd probably have handled it a little better, just logistically.
Yeah, like, I think if he was the Lymond that we saw in the last book, like, if he had all of his faculties together at all times, I think he would have figured out who the main villain was. He would have, he would have treated Robin like Will Scott, and we think about the end result of what happened with Will Scott in the last book. And I don't think we're going to have an end result like that with Robin. And I wonder if that's partially Lymond's fault. It's definitely Robin's fault. Like, Lymond is not to blame for Robin's choices, like, for sure. But at the same time, because we've had these explicit mentions of him as a teacher and him mentoring, and we've seen him do that, and we've seen how much it's sort of instinctive for him to bring people sort of under his wing and all that. And he failed to do that in this case rather dramatically.
Yeah.
So,
well, and we also have, like, think from that scene where Lymond is super exhausted and he needs to go talk to Jenny and he's just trying to get rid of Robin. So he's like, sure, I'll go back to Ireland with you. And he has, of course, no intention of going back to Ireland with him, but he just says it to get him to go away because he's exhausted and he's got things to do. And if he wasn't so worn out and exhausted, he probably would have had a better response to that.
He handled it better. Yeah. Again, not blaming him for the murder or the attempted murder, but yeah.
I mean, also think about, we keep getting these references to Lymond being young. So however old he is, he's young. He doesn't know everything. It wouldn't be a realistic character if he was flawless.
Right.
If he didn't have anything to learn, like, we wouldn't see him grow. So,
but I think it's good. Like, I think that's the whole point, is that we should say, like, this is a flaw, like, this is a mistake. Like, he made the wrong choice in this situation. And that makes him for a more interesting character, like, for sure. And it's also reasonable. Like, of course he wants to get lost in alcohol and deal with his trauma by escape, like, that's a reasonable it's an unhealthy response, but it's an understandable response. But yeah, so like we can't expect perfection from him.
Exactly. Well, and I think it's interesting because he's so hyper confident in the first book that we sort of expect that from him. So it's kind of a surprise to be like, whoa, like this is a delayed trauma reaction. He is really, really messed up.
Yeah. But I kind of like that better. Like I like the fact that he's not handling everything incredibly well. You know, like there was some pretty dramatic stuff that happened, and it's just so much more realistic that because his character's so unrealistic in some ways that I'm glad about this kind of stuff.
He basically has an insane hyper confidence that has to be balanced out by the incredible messed upness.
Yeah.
But this is why people love him so much. It's because he is vulnerable and messed up, and that's why he's not just James Bond, but has the staying power.
Yeah.
Okay, so we get a bunch of plotty stuff. The Cornishman was, we get a reminder that he killed 2 of Tasha's men. He knows who Robin is. There's this reference to D'Aubigny having revealed, or having had that long talk where he was going on and on and on. Actually, it wasn't D'Aubigny. It was George Douglas going on and on about the Master of Culture, Francis Crawford. The reference to him as a provincial ex-galley slave, don't let it disturb you, it is after all true. So it's like references to himself that are very negative. We've got that one, and then we've got the like weird sexual one at the beginning. And then the revelation that Robin, like Lymond set that whole scene up with, I cut my hand, go get me some salve. And he goes to Abernathy, and Tosh is like dropping all these hints until he finally picks it up, and then like leaves the wood block there so that he sees the Coulter arms, and then like leaves so that Stuart will come back and take the put. Like they made it really, really, really obvious to Robin. And so the reason Robin poisoned Thady Boy is in part because he knew that he was Lymond and felt betrayed, of course, by that. But still was begging him to run away with him. So he wasn't going to just kill him. He still wanted to try to salvage their relationship.
And that was just a quick supposition that I had. It was like, maybe Thady Boy's leading him on. Like, maybe he's trying to get him to know that it's him.
You were right, because he said he was going to make himself bait, and he did. But he didn't make himself bait to everybody in the court because he knew Robin was the one he needed to make himself bait to.
Right.
And then there's a bit that I just love about Lymond, because he doesn't blame other people, and he always takes responsibility on himself. So he says, I hadn't quite bargained for deadly nightshade and error of judgment. So he sees that. He has very perceptive, although often overly negative about himself. But in this case, he's right. It was an error of judgment. And then, he says, basically, it would have worked if Liam Rowe hadn't come in, but he says it wasn't Liam Rowe's fault. I didn't have my wits about me, or I should have expected it. So he's not blaming Liam Rowe for intruding in that moment, even though it was a really bad moment for him to come in. He takes full responsibility himself, which I think is part of why he's admirable. And it's also very in contrast to Robin Stewart, who's always going to be like blaming and pointing someone else. If they hadn't done that. And then, of course, and then we get this whole thing about how Lymond suspected Robin for a long time. And if you remember back, there is a part where it's talking about how Robin is spending so much time with him, and Thady Boy is like cultivating the relationship. And by this point, he had reasons of his own. The reasons are that he suspects him. And it's a bunch of things you guys guessed. You guys were ahead of a lot of this. He's an archer, so he could easily get into the room. If you look at the list of suspects, Robin Stewart, you missed this one actually. Robin Stewart had been there earlier, and if you read it in the text, there's reference to how he had been there earlier to prepare for their arrival. So even though he's not on the list of suspects, he was there earlier. And then Dee, you caught this one, which was very, very clever. The part about San Andre was in full view adjusting a girth.
Yeah. It's like it couldn't be him because he was there. Yeah.
Which is very clever. When I read this book, I'm always like, no one's going to pick up on that, but you picked up on that.
Granted, it wasn't my second read of the chapter. I did go back and read, not the chapter, but I read that whole fight section again, because I was like, okay, who had the rabbit? Like, I literally went through that whole section to try and figure out who had the rabbit. So
Nice. And then of course we get all the reasons why Stewart is a good suspect. He was there at this place, he was there at that place, he could have done all these things. And his personality, he was exactly the man I should have looked for. Hardworking, friendless, restless, miserable, longing for Elysian fields of power and admiration, and getting very little in return in his present duties and masters. So it's just like he's primed to be the one who would do something like this. Okay.
And then Robert Stewart isn't a leader. He's a web looking for a spider.
Yes, he is not the big bad, which you guys also guessed. Anything else on those revelations section?
I think none of it was a big surprise to me. I think we had seen it all coming and sort of sussed it out at this point. So I think we've also sussed out who the big bad is, but there's no revelation as to of that yet. So
yes, and there's a red herring at the end with the tower scene, but I don't think it's a strong enough red herring. So we can talk about it when we get there. But
okay, so we've wrapped up all the plotty mystery stuff, and then we're back to the brothers. There's Richard observing him, thinking the whole furnishing of his body must be in rags, which reminds me of that image Liam saw at the end of a previous chapter of this like used up rag doll lying there. Poor Lymond. And then Richard's noticing that he's been coughing up blood, and he gets upset and he says, "What do you want of me? Must I choose between my own child and you?" Which is like, damn, Richard.
Right before we get that though, there was a point that I thought was really telling where Richard is talking about what's happening, and he's like, that is why you're waiting in France, the turtle dove bound in ivy, your favorite role. In spite of himself, his helpless anger was showing. Richard's anger.
Yeah.
And Lyman replies, the Queen Dowager's eminent observer replied reasonably, as he had done throughout, tell me another way. And I think that was so indicative of Lyman. He's just like, what else can I do? Like, is there another way to do it? Tell me, because I'll do it. But there isn't.
But your favorite role is very telling, because he doesn't like sacrifice himself as the last resort. It's like always what comes to his mind is, I'll just sacrifice myself.
Yeah. But I don't think Lyman at this point, like, I think he is sort of like, if you give me another option, I'll do it.
Yeah. Well, he's like at it. He's just like at it.
He's at his, yeah,
really
he's
worn out.
Yeah.
Which is why it's really, I mean, it makes sense. It's surprising, but then it's like, oh, it makes sense when Richard is like, go home, and he's like, okay, I'll go home.
Give me 2 more weeks.
2 more weeks, I'll go home.
And I'm of course I read that and I'm like, 2 weeks, a lot can happen in 2 weeks. Like,
We want to miss Mardi Gras in the French court.
Yeah.
Well, and there's this whole kind of build up. Like, I like how she builds up Thady Boy as she builds up the sort of festival season. And then the end of Thady Boy comes right at this end of Mardi Gras, end of the festival, going into Lent. The whole tone shifts.
Yep. Yeah, we have another comment where Richard refers to him as a boy, and not only that, only a boy. And so he says, "You are only a boy," meaning presently, which makes me think, how old is he? Like, I wrote on the side, I was like, how old is he? Because that sounds like teenager time. Which
he can't be a teenager.
He can't be a teenager.
I mean, 19 at the lowest, but even then.
Fly to Scotland at 12? Like.
Yeah, 2 years as a galley slave, 5 years. No.
Yeah.
He's got to be in his.
He's got to be in his
early 20s, I think.
Otherwise, there are some adults that have something to answer for. If he's 19, there are some people who need to be taken out to the woodshed, because that's just wrong.
It does make you wonder about all this debauched living. Like, is he trying to make up for his teenage years if he spent those on the galleys?
Yeah.
And then it also just like, you're still like developing at those
Yeah.
like late teenage years. So what did it do to him to have Margaret betray him and spend 2 years in the galleys? Like, because he's a mess, but there's reasons for why his psychology is so screwed up.
I mean, all of his like concrete emotional thinking and all that, you develop that when you're like 18 to 26, and your abstract thinking, your ability to think abstractly, your ability to think about the future and consequences all develops in those days. So around that time. So like, if he's still that young, like his ability to conceptualize consequences is not fully developed. And if he experienced so much trauma during that time, it could be arrested at that. And so some of his like throwing himself off the cliff could be that as well. Just
well, and I think it's interesting because there's like multiple kinds of trauma that he experienced. Like, he believed that he killed his sister, and he spent 2 years in the galleys thinking over and over and over, I deserve this because I killed my sister. And then then you have this whole like, I'm not worth anything, I should just sacrifice myself, that always comes to the forefront, because part of him thinks he deserves it, as he failed, it was his fault that his sister died. But then it's also sexual trauma with Margaret, maybe in the galleys. So when he's living this like hyper-sexual experience in the French court, like, is this actually about having fun? Is this acting out in response to sexual trauma? Is he trying to work through it? Like, what's actually going on there?
Yeah.
So then we end with the line, because Richard says, you have your whole life ahead of you. And he says, oh yes, I know. The popular question is, for what? Which has several possible interpretations. Part of it is it's a popular question, meaning everyone is asking what his life is for. And this is back to all these people that are trying to use him and make his life for them, the Queen Dowager, George Douglas, et cetera, et cetera. And this whole discomfort of these people who want to buy him and use him. But then there's that like deeper existential, what is the meaning of my life kind of despair.
Yeah. What is my purpose in life?
And again, I think that's why we love him, because he's fragile and damaged. He's not perfect. Any other comments on those scenes?
It was a breath of fresh air for me.
It was nice.
It was good to see the brothers back together. I wish we have more of it, but
it was nice to see Lymond just interacting with someone where he could let his guard down. Like, we haven't seen that the whole book. There's nobody that he's been able to talk to that knows him, that he trusts. And so that was really, really nice.
100%. I love how you could tell that Lymond loves Richard so much.
I was hoping that Lymond would have this sort of relationship with Liam where he could share a lot of stuff, but that sort of went sour, unfortunately. So I am glad that Richard was brought in to give him this release.
Yeah. And I'm also kind of glad that he didn't have it with Liam, because I like that his relationship with Richard is special. Like, I like that Richard has that role in his life that nobody else does. Maybe somebody will in the future, but not right now.
All right, so Mardi Gras is 2 weeks away, and Thady Boy goes to Newvie to call on Mistress Boyle and her niece Oonagh. And we have this wonderful scene that I also love of they kind of sneak out and they go to the little oratory where there's an organ, and the organ has to be pumped in order to make music. And so he sits to play the organ and she's there sometimes pumping it and sometimes not pumping it. And they have this whole conversation over the organ. And so it certainly is used many times to express the sort of tension in the conversation, which is also very entertaining.
Also useful for preventing eavesdropping. Like
that too.
But someone's eavesdropping anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't do a very good job of preventing eavesdropping.
But they attempt.
So they talk about Liam Rowe. He makes an interesting comment, between us, maybe we did him a little good. he tells her he's leaving by Shrove Tuesday, and he makes a comment about, with Liam Rowe gone, is there hope for him? And she says, with Liam Rowe gone, it makes no difference. He says he wants to see Robin Stewart again. But this whole conversation, I think, isn't really about, do I have a chance romantically? He's actually trying to draw something out and get her to confess something, which she does not do. But then he basically kind of gives her the information in a subtle way that she can trust Richard, and like encourages her to go to Richard, because I think he's like preparing for himself to be away, and like, if you want to reveal whatever it is you have to reveal, you could trust Richard. And I love this. I just love the way that he just kind of casually plays. She also knew how much of his mind it occupied. Like, he's not really focusing on the music, but he's just going. So again, all these lines about between now and then is all the time left for this great land to produce its best to impress me. Would you say I have a chance of being impressed? And again, he's trying to draw something out. And she has the same defense mechanism he has, which is every time he gets close to anything, she goes on defensive and says something nasty. So she makes this comment about how Richard has come to court to take his younger back home. Nursemaids must come dear in Scotland these days. But he just kind of ignores her cutting remarks, again, because I think it's his own defense mechanism, and so he gets it, and he gets it about her. And also, did we have the revelation yet? The master of Coulter, my darling, is lying there in his cradle at mid-Coulter, just 7 weeks old. Is that where we find out the baby? Or did we know already?
We knew already.
I think we knew already, because I think they said something about when they were writing to have Richard come. Like, the baby's already born, he can come, or something like that.
So then that's the conversation with Oonagh, and then he leaves. And before we move on to the next bit, what's going on there? Do you agree with my interpretation? What did you think of that scene?
I agree. I think that they're both trying to get something from each other. It's not just Lymond trying to pull it out of Oonagh. She's also trying to get information from him.
Yeah, they both have knowledge that they're not admitting to the other that they have, and they're both trying to get the other one to tell them stuff, and they're not, neither of them is giving in. So no. It's kind of a nice scene of him like grappling with someone who can hold their own, which is nice.
Yes. So then Mistress Boyle comes in after he leaves and slaps Oonagh really hard on both cheeks. Yeah.
Yeah, I was not expecting her to be that awful.
It even tells us it's the version of her we saw at the cheetah hunt, the rotten one.
Yeah.
And she's just really abusive and horrible. And we hear this idea of this has been a long battle with swords on either side. So Oonagh grabs a candlestick and almost hits her, but she catches her wrist. So they beat each other up regularly, apparently.
Yeah.
And then Mistress Boyle accuses her of being attracted to Thady Boy and calls her a greedy, beef-witted slut. My God, she's horrible.
Yeah.
And then in their conversation, we get all these revelations. They know that Lymond is Thady Boy. They're up to something, but we don't know.
I think they were under the assumption that Liam Rowe was Lymond earlier.
For a while, which makes me wonder, it makes me have perhaps a little bit of sympathy than I had before because if Oonagh thought that Liam Rowe was Lymond, and if she knew anything about Lymond, then perhaps her whole trick with the king was under the assumption that he would not fall for it. Like, that he would be a little bit more savvy in the court. Maybe.
Well, so there's this whole thing about their honorable friend who knows that Thady Boy is Lymond, and he's angry at Oonagh because this honorable friend is claiming Oonagh O'Dwyer deceived me. Oonagh O'Dwyer let me believe that Lymond and Phelim Liam Rowe were one and the same. She deceived me unwittingly, she says, then let her prove it. So I believe that what this is saying is she knew that Lymond was Thady Boy, but she did not tell the honorable friend. And now he is angry and she has to let Lymond get killed, or basically she'll get killed.
Hmm.
So when do you think she knew that? Do you think she's known all along that Thady Boy was Lymond?
I think she knew all along.
I don't have a sense of that.
I would have to go back and reread just to see.
I don't have a good sense of
Bits.
Go back and reread. There's a whole bunch of stuff she says that's like, she totally knows.
that. Okay. Well, then I take it back. I still don't like her for doing what she did to Liam.
But then it means that she didn't tell on Lymond. So the question to that is why?
Yeah.
And what's their secret? And what's their cause?
Who is the honorable friend?
And who's the honorable friend? Yeah.
What's
What's Lymond trying to get out of her?
Well, here's my question. Here's my actual question about all this. Is what is the ultimate goal of Oonagh and Mistress Boyle? Like, I feel like we can assume it's some sort of pro-Irish thing. But how in the world is this going to, like, what are they trying to get happen? Are they trying to get, is the honorable friend promised some sort of French help for Ireland? Has there been some sort of, they're backing a different leader kind of thing? Is this Cormac or whatever his name is going to come into
Cormac O'Connor.
Cormac O'Connor. Was Oonagh trying to get Liam Rowe to become a rival to Cormac O'Connor? Like, is that what was going on there? Yeah, I have a lot of questions about this.
Any other guesses on this section?
Nothing from me.
I am intrigued with this. So, okay, at the end of this, it says, okay, so Mistress Boyle says, the plan to deal with your musical friend is to go on. And if you warn Master Bala or divert him, or if he escapes in any way, whether with your help or not, you and our cause, Oonagh or Dwyer, are both lost. And then she replies, and what are we now? She said bitterly, opening it to the warm, bustling world just outside, we and our cause. Okay, so I wonder, because we definitely have seen Oonagh as a character who resists authority. And like, she resists being told what to do. She definitely is her own person. So I can see her responding to this ultimatum with a big ol' F you. And like, I can see her like maybe not to the face of the honorable friend, like doing anything, but I could see her, because Lymond definitely escaped the end of the next chapter, like, for sure. So I don't think she would sacrifice her ultimate goal. Like, I don't think she's gonna openly help him or do anything that would put her at risk blatantly. But I could see her like doing something that would, as long as it wouldn't get her in trouble and as long as it wouldn't betray them and their cause to the honorable friend, I could see her maybe, like, because she would not respond well to that ultimatum, I don't think.
I think also there's definitely an implication that she is in a bad situation with this awful woman hitting her and berating her.
Yeah.
And Lymond is kind of offering like, sort of, tell me what you know and I'll help you. I'm going to be leaving, but you can tell my brother. So even though they're sort of countering each other as sort of peers and almost like enemies, he's still trying to sort of offer some sort of subtle help in exchange for her help. And so you could also see her being inclined toward him because of that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't put her in too much danger or too much like risk. You could see her seeing that as a possibility and maybe help come from that quarter.
And she's upset about this. She's upset about the plan to kill Lymond because she says it's bitter. What are we now? We and our cause, meaning like if we're going to be part of this plan to kill this guy, like, yeah, that's bad.
Not in favor of it.
How does this help what we're trying to accomplish here in France? Does it?
Yeah. Okay, so we go on to, I have no idea how to pronounce French names. Amboise, an accident happens. So we start with a great setup in this chapter that tells us pretty much how it's going to end. Characteristically, the plan to brush Lymond finally from the path was so expensive, so wasteful, and so baroque that no one guessed it or anticipated it, and Francis Crawford himself was neither warned nor certainly diverted. Yeah. So we're going to, of course, spend this whole chapter going, ooh, they're going to get him. How are they going to get him?
Yeah, and also, we're not dealing with a criminal mastermind here.
No.
And I feel like that's such a good, it's such a good description of every single plan so far. Like, expensive, wasteful, and baroque. You know?
But it's kind of also great that she gets away with writing this completely ridiculous plot because it's like, well, the villain is ridiculous. What can I do?
Like, this is how I think. I mean, it's like, okay, you're gonna shoot again with the pop culture examples, but it's like, and I've never seen Austin Powers, but it sort of feels like all the like tidbits I've seen of the villain from Austin Powers who's like maniacal in this over the top way, and they just kind of feel
Dr.
like,
Evil, I love him so much.
Yeah, so it's like, it feels like our villain is kind of like, waha, we're gonna do this crazy over the top plan.
He's got sharks with laser beams on their head.
Yeah. Like if sharks with laser beams were a thing, this villain, whoever this villain is, would be 100% on board with that. Like,
I never thought you guys would compare this villain to Dr. Evil, but I love it. It works. Okay, so we learn also that Lymond, Richard has his men follow Lymond for his own safety, which Lymond doesn't even notice. Again, he is off his game. And this wonderful description of Lymond, he looked magnificently lightheaded, trapped in his own image like a fighting fish attacking a mirror. Her words are just extraordinary.
It's like there's such an example of futility and like effort and futility. And
so then we get some sort of plotty stuff, which is that, so Catherine, the Queen, Catherine de Medici, who is the one that ordered Richard brought based on the anonymous tip, talks to him, finds him likable, and figures out that it was just some internal political squabbling and it doesn't matter. We also find that the Queen Dowager has given George Douglas what he wanted, the earldom of Morton for his son.
Because John Knoxville's so rich, he doesn't need it. Which just makes me think, how's Agnes doing?
Agnes Harry.
Oh.
Agnes of Maxwell.
I hope she's doing okay.
Yeah. We also get George Douglas thanking her in suitable terms that had not made the decision public, even his closest relative in France, since he took pleasure in encouraging Lord D'Aubigny's occasional mild hysteria on the ingratitude of princes. So he's like trolling his relative.
Yep.
George is funny. I love George.
Yeah. And I love this, that it amused him to listen to his lordship comparing with acrimony the rewards brought him by a life of devotion to the arts, which we already know is fishy because his taste is not that great. And the attention being showered by the court of France on the head of Thady Boy Bala. So like, D'Aubigny is going around ranting about, I haven't gotten what I've deserved, and all of that.
He's just another version of Robin Stewart who thinks he's better but isn't.
Which makes sense. They're working together. I want to know at some point in these books where George Douglas actually stands. Like, obviously he's in it for himself and he'll go to whatever side he needs to go to get what is right for him. But like,
I think that's where he stands.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's any deeper than that. Like, I think he's just like, whatever's in front of him and gives him the best chance, that's what he does.
In one part, he'll be doing something to hamper And of course, this goes back to whatever best helps him. But like, he's hampering Lymond in one bit and then completely helping him the next. And I'm like, make up your damn mind.
That's because he doesn't care either way. Like you said, he's just out for himself.
Yeah, he doesn't have any I don't think he has any loyalty to anything except his own chance. So he'll support you in one moment and throw you under the bus the next moment. Doesn't matter to him.
Well, and it's like kind of like how Lymond calls his bluff when he's like, do what I want or I'll reveal you. And he's like, go ahead and reveal me, because he knows George won't, because it doesn't actually benefit George in any way to reveal him, and not revealing him keeps him as an option that George could use in some other way. So George isn't going to reveal him.
Yeah, well, I guess if Lymond knows that about him, then he at least knows when to trust him and when not to. So
Never.
Never.
Never trust him, but know when his interests align with yours, and you can trust that he'll do,
Use him. Don't trust him.
Yeah, exactly. Which he clearly does at the end of the last book,
Mm-hmm.
Plays a game there with George Douglas testifying in his favor because it benefits George at the time. So then we also have this great kind of description of the court having gone so far into this realm of debauchery that it's actually affecting the ability to govern. The gay, crude, libidinous life of the private parlor and supper table began to lick at the stiff, sugary edges of etiquette. Again, the seasonal thing, I like how she uses the seasons, the wild weeks of festivities that lasted from Candlemas up to Shrove. The revels, pageants, masks and balls, baiting in turn, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the guy who was...
Yeah, the fourth guy comes back.
Yeah, so the guy who was in London, the Vidame de Chartres, arrives from London, and he cast his large practiced brown eyes on Dongan's new ami and gently made himself known to Master Vala. Yeah. So I don't know how anyone reads this book and doesn't think Dongan is sleeping with Thady Boy.
Text. That is text.
Yeah, clearly.
There's no subtext here. Diane and Lymond are a thing. In public, they're a thing. People know. It's not...
So then we have, under the debilitating impact of Thady Boy and the relaxations of the season, affairs were being made to wait which could not wait, or were going by default. The historic half-caste of political frivolity in the fine eye of France had become something like blindness. So again, the whole court is now being compromised. The political situation is being compromised. And then there's a bit that I also really like. Richard's observing it, and it says, he was never doubting that Lymond would keep his word. Which is the antithesis of what Richard thought of Lymond in the previous book. So
in 2 years.
And basically, Richard is going to stay to finish the job when Lymond goes home. Which is very sweet. Okay, so then Lymond is trying to provoke attack, and he wants it to happen ASAP because he's only got 2 weeks. So he's, as Richard observes, he's going to use every means in his power to provoke an attack during these 2 weeks. And until Lymond was out of the way, the queen was probably safe. So he's protecting the queen and also putting himself in danger, which is what he does. And another great description of Thady Boy at the top of 264, the fuelless blaze, which was Thady Boy Vala. He is like fuelless blaze, right? He has always had so much energy, but he is at the end.
Yeah, he's a fire that's about to go out. Yeah, I will say I was a little bit distracted for this whole coming scene by this next line where it says, it reached the raw Saturday night before Shrove, when dressed in John Stewart of Obney's mast and cloak of green feathers, he rode with a party of 20. I kept waiting for the whole scene. I was like, why is he in D'Aubigny's cloak and feathers? I kept waiting for that green cloak to mean something.
He's Quetzalcoatl.
Yeah,
that's what he is.
I was waiting for it to be a concrete thing that it was someone was gonna be oh, it's D'Aubigny, and then whisper something to him or mistake him for him or something.
As the Quetzalcoatl mask showed up again in this chapter, and then again later at the end, I was like, I wonder if this is going to be another damn brooch moment where I'm going to have to go back and trace the mask from the beginning of this book. I don't think it's
Do it
that
if it is.
diabolical, though.
It only shows up if I think it's there more for the symbolism, right?
Yeah.
The Dionysus and Quetzalcoatl, the trickster figure that Lymond is in this book.
Yeah.
So then we get a couple of moments with Lymond where we're kind of getting into his point of view. It's not fully his point of view, but we're getting information about what's going on with him that we don't usually get. So in particular, he drinks a solid tankard of strong wine, then the pain not deadening at all. So he's drinking to dull the pain. He's not drinking to be debauched at this point. He just feels terrible and is trying to medicate. And then we have Lymond wondered prosaically if he was going to faint, and again with clinical interest whether his health would give out before either the term of his promise or the assassin completed the task. So there's this weird kind of detached, almost like dissociative attitude he has, which is partly because he's just super drunk, but also I think, you know, he's just exhausted and at the end, and he's very depressed, and he's kind of like, oh yeah, maybe I'm about to die, but I don't care.
Maybe I'll finish my task. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll die. You know, you're like, ow.
Poor dear. So then there's an attack, but it turns out that it's actually a messenger that Tosh sent, and the men who were Richard sent to protect him clashing with each other, and Lymond kind of berates them and tells them to go get the messenger, and they bring him back, and he has a message.
Yeah. I love the fact that he calls him out by name, and he's just like, ugh, what are you doing?
Like, how did you know it was us?
Yeah.
And I love...
He's like, you better find him for me, haven't you?
And I love how Lymond, said Lymond pleasantly, you'd better find him for me, hadn't you? He still manages to just be this, like, arrogant bastard, you know.
You just gotta get this, well, you better do this, right? So good.
I would not want to meet Lymond in a bad mood, I have to say.
Yeah. And they're like, for the question, in order, said Lymond, to apologize. And I mean, again, it's just like, you idiots were so wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I'd also be upset if people knew me as Fishy James. That's like a pretty bad nickname to go by.
Yeah. Also, I love that we have this again, somebody known by the title of being somebody else's, like, so like Jockey's Rob. So the Rob that belongs to Jockey. You know? And because before we had a like Janet's somebody, or there was somebody in the last book who was like,
somebody. Well, no, I'm reading this book about the Scottish like border raiders, and there's a bunch of names like that.
Yeah, I love it. It's like, who's Steve are you? You're, you know, Gracie Steve, you know.
We have also a line here that's very telling. He'd met the younger one back at Mid-Coulter, or he'd not met, or rarely met, but he'd heard about him. It beat him how the master ... how young Crawford knew their names. So 2 important bits in there. 1, he's young, yet again. 2, the master ... meaning it's a reminder he's lost his title. So again, I think a lot of this existential despair about identity is he lost a big piece of his identity.
Which was, we didn't touch on it, but it was one of the things during that organ conversation, like when Oonagh brings up the baby, like she's being mean. Like she's saying, like, yeah, you're not the master of Coulter anymore. Mm-hmm. And, yeah.
Wait, does she bring it up, or does he actually?
Well, she says something snotty about it.
She definitely says something snotty.
Yeah.
I feel like he brought it up, and then she was...
she says, a pity, wait. Oh yeah, so, yeah, no, she does, because she says, her eyes were contemptuous. That's a feudal custom if you like. Lord Dunnell's heir is never plain Billy Dunnell, but the master of this or the master of that. Lord Coulter's heir, I believe, is called the master of Coulter, who cannot even master himself. And
she's ripping on him, but she's not bringing up the baby because she doesn't realize that he's not the master of Coulter anymore.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
And he brings it up. The master of culture, my dear, is lying there in his cradle at mid-culture.
So she was just being snotty about his title, not realizing he didn't have it anymore.
Which again, I feel like the thing with Oonagh is like the reader isn't set up to like her, but Lymond is kind of set up to like her because her defense mechanisms are the same as his.
Yeah.
So then the news that we get is that the big news is that Liam went to London, and also Robin Stewart did not come back at all, and they think maybe he went back to Scotland. So, oh my God, we're gonna go to London, and Liam was gonna be there. How exciting!
London, baby. Okay.
Why did Liam go to Scotland? I mean, London. I mean, we don't have any way of knowing that yet. It's just a supposition. But
wait, what?
I don't know why, Laura. Why would Liam go to London?
I know. I'm curious about that too. I felt like that was sort of plopped in here. I was like, what? As soon as I read that, I'm just like, where's that coming from?
And in his best silken suit. We already know that Liam doesn't take the time usually to dress up. So
what is he doing? Like,
think back to a couple of things. One, Lymond early on as Thady Boy was talking to an English messenger or something like that about potentially making an alliance with England because England's also trying to court these Irish people to come be on their side.
Right.
And in the conversation between Oonagh and Liam, they both were like, yeah, the French court is really decadent and screwed up. England's actually a little better.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he said England's a little better. She didn't.
Yeah.
It was James Mason, a retiring English ambassador in France. They talked a lot about him, but we never actually met him in the plot of the book. So
yeah.
A
mystery. Yeah, this section like solves a bunch of mysteries and then sets up a bunch of new mysteries.
Well, it's only halfway through the book, so we do need more mysteries. So
yes,
we do.
Well, a little more than half, but.
I hope they actually tell us that Diabni is the villain soon, so that we can have so there can be a new problem. Because I feel like we figured this one out, and I'm like, I hope that this is not the final mystery of the book. Like, I want there to be a revelation of Diabni as the villain, the same way that there was a revelation of Robin as the poisoner. So like, hopefully that will come in like. Maybe 2 or 3, maybe this section, like then maybe the end of this section will be that, because I really hope it's not the revelation of the end of the book. I want something more.
He is to Albany, but he's actually working for the Queen Dowager, who is trying to kill her own children.
No,
that would be a twist.
Lennox is gonna come in. It's Diabni, but it's really her.
Okay. So we're almost done, so let's just finish the rest of it. So back in Lymond's point of view, kind of, as always now, the reaction was almost more than he could bear. It took a major effort of will to return to the inn for the drink that would smother it and let him go on. So this is like sustenance drinking. He is wrecked, but still finds a fresh idea, had already caught fire. And then we get this whole crazy race of the Aztecs and the Turks, which is a bunch of French idiots wearing costumes.
Was this the thing that happened? Because, like, like the entry into Ruin was real. Like, was this a race that was real?
I don't think that the race was real, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. Someone on YouTube can tell us otherwise. I did like a little tiny bit of research on this and was like, I don't think
was the guy who died a real guy? Did he really die in this way?
I'm pretty sure he's fictional and that she killed a fictional character.
Okay.
Which is funny because she embeds him from the very beginning. He's there the first time Liam goes to the French court.
Yeah, he's
so
the translator in the tennis match.
Yeah, so you assume he's real, and then you're like, oh shit, he died. Oh no.
Yeah.
Also,
she's so good.
His partner? No. The Bourbon brothers are partners. He's St. Andre's partner in the race.
Yeah.
Against Don. Yeah. He's another royal archer.
Yeah. So he's blended in with all these real people. So when he dies, you're shocked, even though like if you read what happens, none of the real people actually get killed.
I was shocked.
Also, just a little clue here to keep in mind. The nearly sober young captain had gone, and to keep him nearly sober, an archer called Andre Spence had gone with him. Another archer.
Yeah.
And here's Lymond, not thinking very clearly, part of his mind distantly occupied with analyzing the significance of what he had just learned, another part philosophically recognized that the crisis he had been waiting for was probably upon him, and that he had sent his brother's men home. The rest of him did not care, for by then he was blessedly exceedingly drunk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oops.
Not good.
Not good.
So he gets that mask again from Daubeny, and fails to order his vagrant senses as they go up the bridge and into the castle. And then there's this whole scene where they're doing this really stupid race down this, the Tour de Minimes, which is like a tower with a very steep ramp.
I'm interested to see this picture because, like, I can't just fathom it in my head.
It's a super big windy ramp that goes up a tower. Like,
yeah. Okay, I found some pictures. I shall show them. I know there's better ones, but I ran out of time to find them. So if any YouTube commenters want to send us better pictures of the Tour de Minimes, go for it. Tower.
I think it was inside.
I didn't know it was inside either. I thought it was outside.
I totally thought it was outside.
Yeah.
No,
it's inside.
Wow, that is.
But that makes much more sense now with the sort of blockade that happens of dead horses, because they're sort of blocked in on the inside. I thought, why wouldn't they just fall over the side of the ramp? I don't get it.
Yeah, that totally makes more sense. That's gorgeous. Wow.
So yeah, I'm totally going there when the world lets us back in, whatever does.
Okay.
There's this amazing image, San Andre's face, earringed and turbaned, melted in the queer slanting glare into an eminently disjointed shadows. Creepy.
Yeah.
And everybody's really kind of wrecked. And Dongan is holding Lymond's reins, and he kind of, as they go into this, he kind of like he waves at Richard, and then Richard impulsively waves back, which is like kind of revealing that they have a relationship, but whatever. He's leaving. He's supposedly about to leave. All right. So then there's also, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's not that the revelation of their relationship would endanger Lymond, but not Richard. So...
yeah, because everybody knows who Richard is.
Everybody knows who Richard is. So.
Yeah. So then this kind of great image, like heifers pouring knee on shoulder through the Martinmas hurdle, like dolphins soaring back underbelly in a jubilant pack, like Aztecs, like Muslims, like rich and wanton young men. The horsemen choked the wide gateway and rushed over the lip. So it gives all these like this, like that, and then it tells you what they really are: rich and wanton young men. That's what these people actually are. We've been calling them like rich assholes the whole time, and like she's kind of like, yeah, that's what they are.
Yeah, that's what they are. Yeah, and then I mean, yeah, we've got like the sort of order of the I'm trying to think of my words, the order of the people in the race. And there was a couple things, like Dongan, who had been watching him press to his side, so he's still beside Lymond, but Daubeny, his handsome face concentrated, flew with the remainder behind. So
sticks to the back of the pack.
At the back, concentrating.
Yep. So as you mentioned, Duganston goes first and dies instantly. And then Francis Crawford of Lymond, she gives his full name. His reins run through Dongan's hand, and he crashes, rolls, and slides to lie broken slack, a mess of scarlet-stained feathers like a week-old kill in some queer spiral muse. And then right after that, there's all these people also, crash into it, and they're piled like marionettes. So going back to that image of that like used up rag doll. This is like the culmination of that image. And like the actual event happens really fast, and then we spend more time on the aftermath where Richard is watching all these bodies being taken out and injured people, and he's like looking for his brother and not finding Lymond. We have notably San Andre is fine, the Vidam, minor injuries, Daganson's dead. Albany was unconscious, his clothes bloodstained, but his pulse was steady.
Was he unconscious? Really? Oh my God.
Especially being at the back of the pack where he had plenty of time to slow down and stop, but still make it look like he was a part of it.
Right. Bloodstained clothes are easy to get in this situation. His pulse is totally steady, and he's faking.
The Prince of Condé sounds like it was pretty bad for him, though. Like, he's been crushed twice. So his hip and his arm are broken. Not good.
Dongan's okay.
Even though he was right behind Lymond, he tried to stop Lymond's horse from crashing into it.
He locked out. So they can't find Lymond, and we have this whole thing of all these bodies being taken away. Thady Boy Bala, who had been seen to fall hurt by half the riders about him, was no longer there. And then we have this very strange man, who we don't know who it is, looking down at the death lying about him, contempt, and he says, Tassato muse avec la rude liar. I don't speak any French, sorry, but I will look it up and give you what it means. But he ends it with, the devil give you his bed now, Master Thady Boy Bala.
Yeah, and I just think that's Dabney. And he just looks around at what he's wrought and then fakes being unconscious.
You foolish muse with your rustic lyre. From a 15th century poem satirizing the burlesque society, something in ruin, which I'm pronouncing.
Also be Lymond, who's been unscathed, saying his goodbyes to Thady Boy Bala, because he's leaving that persona behind now.
How could Lymond be unscathed?
Except
I don't think it could be. It's just a suggestion. I don't think it really is, but
except that there's a 2 in the line, gone 2, in addition to Thady Boy. So, like Thady Boy was this, gone 2 was the man who looking down. So it can't be Thady Boy. Yeah. I think it's Dabney. It's just like, it says, like looking down at the death line about him had exclaimed, unheard in the uproar, contempt in his reflective soft voice. So it's like he saw this destruction, said this, he like, ha ha, you're gone too. And then just like either his clothes are bloodstained or he makes them bloodstained and he just kind of like fakes being unconscious. And, we definitely got that image of Lymond crashing, rolling, and lying broken slack like a week-old kill. So we don't know how badly injured he is, but we know that he had hit his end, like his limit, even before this crash. So this is he's not in good shape. This does not, like, I don't feel like he got out of this on his own. Like, the way this is described, it feels like I'll be surprised if the next time we see him, he's like, wandering around a grove of trees or something. Like, I think somehow he had some help getting out of this, because that's why I kind of suspect that maybe Oonagh knew what the plan was and did something, or I don't know. I don't know how she could, but
see that?
I just feel like the way it's described, it seems like he's pretty broken.
So then just to wrap up the chapter, they find the trip rope, and 5 days after the disaster, Tosh appears, and we get this kind of shocking revelation that he's found the mask, that Quetzalcoatl mask, and inexplicably he finds it in Blois, trampled underfoot by spectators like himself in the crowded courtyard of Elian and Moutier's empty house, which is Oonagh's cousin's house that she'd been staying at, which had burned down.
Yeah. So again, I think maybe Oonagh had something to do with him getting out.
I don't know exactly the relationship between Oonagh and the Moutiers, but I could see her burning the hotel down.
Or just bringing Lymond there and then something happening.
But it was the same night, right? The hotel burned down the same night as the 5 days later.
5 days later.
Oh.
Yeah, not the same night. So I could see her like bringing, they seem to have a pretty amicable relationship from what little we saw. So I could see her bringing Lymond to them and then something happening. But I do not think he died in the fire. That's ridiculous. So.
Any final questions or comments on this chapter?
If Oonagh did not help him escape from this whole thing, I hope that we get a clear explanation of what happened, because I feel like him just walking away from that is doesn't fit the description of what's going on with him. Like he had no fuel, like literally they said he was a fuelless fire. Mm-hmm. And then he was in this massive accident. So if he walked away from it, I'm like,
no, somebody helped him.
Divine intervention? Like
no, it wasn't Richard or Tom.
It couldn't have been Richard. Maybe Tom? Might be Margaret? Like
Margaret's a possibility.
It couldn't have been Richard because he was on the balcony, or like he waved to him before the race started. So
I doubt it was Jenny.
Before we wrap up with this chapter, I have a little bit of fan art to show you.
Oh yay, I was hoping to do it.
So this is Prince of Pictou on Tumblr. This is I love the description, blah blah donga and silky sleeve around his shoulder, blah blah Thady Boy.
What Cornishman?
Cornishman. Yeah. And then another, I guess, Dongan and Thady Boy. And then this is my favorite, Thady Boy, which first of all, it started with the idea of drawing Thady Boy licentious and dissolute, glittering and wickedly witty, sleeping with half the French court. But in the end, I kept thinking about the passage where he first places the court to earn his place among them. When Saint Andre paws at his shirt, and at first Lymond is furious, he jumps up and nearly ruins the whole act, but then decides to suck it up and let his body be touched. And then it became less Lymond the sex god and more Lymond prostituting himself and pretending not to care, but actually hating himself. What a great piece of fan art, even though it totally glosses over his weight.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
A+.
The Ongan behind him?
Yeah.
Guess so. I mean, it could be half of the men in the French court.
Yeah, and his face is just so sad.
And this one is by Languish Locked in L on Tumblr.
Sounds good.
Okay, guys, what do you want to happen next? Or what do you think will happen next?
Well, we know that Lymond isn't dead, so...
Right. I hope they don't draw that out. I hope she doesn't draw that out. I would like Lymond to show back up soon.
And we know we're going to London, so if
Lymond... Liam Rowe's going to be there.
Yeah. We'll have more of the Liam Rowe, possibly Robin Stewart. The chapter's called The Excitement of the Hunt. So what would Lymond be hunting in London?
Robin?
Robin, possibly.
I mean, he wants evidence from Robin, and he needs to know who the villain is. Like that's a piece of information he needs to know.
I'd be surprised if he doesn't already know, knowing Lymond.
That's true.
Like I wouldn't be surprised to find out later, once it's revealed who it is, that Lymond didn't already know. He was just looking for proof to make sure everybody else knew, you know?
That's true. But then that would be the exact same thing twice in the same book, which is weird. But yeah, I guess so. But if he doesn't know, he needs to know.
Yes.
And Robin does know. So that would be something to go after him. Do you think he thinks that Oonagh knows? I mean, obviously she does.
I think that he knows that Oonagh's a part of it, definitely, and that
Yeah.
has information. So
then I'm curious if that he didn't push her harder in that once in the organ scene, and maybe he'll push her harder to know.
well, maybe he can now that the disguise is no longer needed. Like, he doesn't need to
maybe.
pretend he's Thady Boy anymore, because Thady Boy is dead.
Yeah. I'd like more Richard. Just like Richard. Maybe Margaret Lennox will come up and be like like she'll be like the smart villain.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to London, so I would not be at all surprised if she's there. Or any of the other generals, like, was it Lord Grey, the one with a lisp?
Temporary lisp, yeah.
Well, temporary, but...
Yeah. Also, so this, I don't know if this will happen, but the villain is so ridiculous and baroque and wasteful and all of that. I don't know what's gonna happen for his like comeuppance, or like however the villain gets defeated, which, you know, who knows. I'm assuming it will happen. I kind of want the defeat of the villain to be like over the top and baroque and wasteful, you know, like there to be some sort of like that he's defeated with his own, like whatever his own plan is, like it defeats him in some like very dramatic, humiliating way that the villain will be squashed, you know, because he wanted to kill a little kid. So.
Any final questions or comments?
Looking forward to see what happens.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Yeah.